Beautiful, beloved woman, sisters, and divine feminine. We are chatting today in a little bit of a different way of a Q&A, where we get to have direct conversation with infinite intelligence on a topic of conversation I've been very presently aware of in this present moment in the lead up to the purity of Isis. So we will share a little bit about that topic, but first of all, let's introduce Zen Ixia. And if you haven't met Zen before on our Q&As or in any of our calls, she is my VA and the High Priestess that is in support and facilitation for the purity of Isis.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. I am Zen Ixia, Giaia's VA, and I have been under her mentorship for going on 4 years now. I am a previous Purity of Isis initiate in 2025, and now I'm here working personally with her. So today I'm going to be asking her some questions on women and where they're at right now in the collective.
Yeah, so I'd love to sort of just share a little bit about that before we go into the direct channel and the Q&A. I actually mentioned to Zen right before that it felt like we were going to be talking about a group of feminine that are sort of just sitting and bobbing, or that are in a fog, they're in a cloud, they're in an illusionary reality. And the words that came through was they're possessed by their experience. Now, that kind of gave this understanding of not really moving forward, not really changing, not really healing, being controlled by the conditioning, the matrix, by what they believe they are, their wounds. And there's this numbing or this disassociated expression where they don't even realize they haven't grown and evolved. And the only way I could explain it was that I've been committed to my purpose for the last 6.5, 7 years. And when I first started to step out of exactly this consciousness, where I was looping and I was default and I was run by my trauma and I wasn't moving and I wasn't making change really, I came across a modality. It's the only modality that I've trained myself in. And I went into that and it was enough to wake me up to myself. And it was quite a masculine modality, so very much in the mind of like, you created this. And I think that was, and it is quite a true slapping reality. If you're not willing to look at yourself, it could be quite uncomfortable. And it was what helped me to, I guess, begin the journey of transformation and change. And I have become aware of and observed that over this period of rapid transformation for me, that there's still women in my field, mostly women, that are still stuck at the same level of evolution. And I was saying how it surprises my human that people can watch, follow, and go on this journey and watch all of this change for me and watch all of the different pathways and the relationships and the different themes around galactic star seeds and past lives and then conscious business and mystery schools and new earth and all of these different things, and still function from this same level of consciousness. And so we sort of started to do a bit of inquiry around what is that and why does that happen. Then you said you sort of felt like you went into a little bubble of it for a short period a couple of weeks ago before a session. Do you want to share a little bit about that so that we can get some tangible understanding?
It definitely hasn't been an uncommon theme in the last 6 years of my awakening as well. So I've also been on my journey for 6, 7 years, and it wasn't until the purity of Isis that I came to a point of sitting in creation and not healing. But it's definitely followed a theme of when a choice point comes and when there's a path to take, I kind of sit there for some time. I don't notice it's really happening consciously. It feels very ground, but it's just like this energy of like stagnancy. I just feel like I'm just sitting in lethargy and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's next. Or I will receive insight and guidance, and then I will create a story and be like, oh no, actually, if I stay here, if I do this thing, then I will have a better result, or I'll be happy, or I'll be more secure, whatever it is. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in this energy and there was a choice point to move locations. which I had been aware of for already maybe a month. When I came back to my house after I was on a holiday, which sparked that choice point, I told myself, no, if I invest more money into my house and I make it more comfortable, I will be more happy. I can focus here. I can enjoy myself. And I got on call with Giaya. We had a blueprint session and she was like, Zen, I need to be harsh with you. It's a true slap moment. And it was one of the more profound sessions we've had. It was really beautiful and needed. And since that moment, I felt a lot of clarity in myself and in my experience. And there's still a few little human things, but I know what my trajectory is and what I need to do.
It's interesting because as you were talking, I was like, yeah, that happens for so many of us. We don't necessarily recognize or witness when we start going into that stagnant energy or that we've slowed down. And really, I kind of was in a little version of that before today. You know, I was like, oh, I feel like snail's pace. Then I was like, I don't really like want to build content. Like that means doing my hair and my makeup. And I had that vibe of like, ugh. And right, and the story can be anything to justify it, of like, oh well, you've just had surgery and you're not feeling your best, you're about to move, you've got a new dog, da 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 da. You can tell yourself whatever story, but really, when I sat with what it was around real building of momentum and I guess explosion forward. And for me, I know that I love to have a consistent momentum in life and growth, which is why I went through such a period of purification and a level of enlightenment, attainment, and then went through another journey of that and leveled up again. And this is something that I have enjoyed, is constant momentum. Yet when I don't have that, sometimes I don't even realize it until there's a choice point of you can really build or really like move forward, or you can get stuck and stay. Because I guess I've been pushing myself to not get stuck and to continue to move and evolve, and had quite a lot of self-discipline. It doesn't last very long for me, but if we don't witness it and we don't observe it, we can get stuck in it for months, years, decades. We can like literally be in that autopilot, meh, numb, desensitized experience. And all it took for me was to literally have a shower, put some makeup on, put a nice outfit on, and I wasn't in that energy yet, right? I was still in the snail, even with the makeup and the outfit. And I sat down in front of the computer and I was like, no, I wrote down something. I need to talk about something. And it was about sovereignty and freedom with blueprints, which, you know, you can follow and find on YouTube because it will be uploaded later. But is that I sat there and I was like, this is such a good topic, but I was like still numb about it. And as soon as I took my breaths and I was like, no, this, I can feel this is a layer of resistance. If I move through this resistance, I know that every time I move through resistance, I get a big charge, I get this excitement, I get this exhilaration almost, and it starts to build on top of each other. And so since then, and just forcing myself to move through that and facilitate that 5-minute video, it's been like really high vibe, happy, joyful experiences since. And that's my natural state of being. And it was in the acknowledgement that certain things for my human were not being nourished. I think we're going to learn a lot in today's infinite intelligence quantum channeling experience, because the direct channeling talks directly to, I guess, the truth without the circling and the looping and the human palatable explanation. And so there can be a lot of frequencies coming through as we receive this, and they're quite neutral. So sometimes what they say, I've been told off by my channel. Yeah, I've been told off by my channel many times. I'll be like, nah, well, it's not quite like that. And then I get like barked back at. And I kind of like being told off by my channel because I feel like there's an authoritarian, like, you know, you don't know everything, Kiaya. And so there can be some really big, uncomfortable things, and I guess opportunities to see if you are partaking in this, if you are enabling this, or if you're being at the effect of this expression of woman. You know, it's no difference whether you're a man, you can still have the same experience. You can be basically letting life possess you and not actually allow for the true self and the true nature to move, change, and evolve. Whether you're man or woman, we will be directly talking to the female experience because that's where I am here to serve, and that's also what Zen's here to serve, and we are women. So we can only talk to so much around consciousness because we don't have a penis.
Question 1. Giaya, what does it look like when a woman has confused being comfortable with staying safe?
The identification of the differential aspects of the experience can look and appear very similar. And this is where woman will often use her own narrative to continue what is considered safe or comfortable. Because safety is a level of comfort. When you have been programmed or conditioned or created aspects of self that have kept you in a level of safety from experiencing certain knowns or revisiting situations, what you could consider is this is a comfort layer. Safety and comfort are really one of the same spectrum. That when one sits in comfort, they're more functioning from the point that you would consider it a disassociation to the fear or the level of terror that might be existing within the body. Comfort is another expression on the same scale of what you would consider safe. So when you're questioning something around or is a woman just choosing safety or comfort, she's choosing one of the same thing. Yet her lens of experience is that she might be focusing on redirecting herself away of and from the fear, terror, or horror that might exist within what is required for her to move into a new direction. Anytime an individual, and specifically women, have a comfort strategy to not change based on their biology and the different experiences that have taken place, that they have higher sensations and internal defaults to fear based on ancestral experiences, past lives, and the domination through patriarchal interpretations of the current female construct of mind, is that their body holds a higher fear narrative around elements of life. These fears are held in containment and what you might consider comfort zones or containers that are held within storage compartments within the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual bodies. This keeps those elements safe or allowing for what you might consider a comfortable experience away from the trauma, the unmet aspects of identity, or the shadow information and its inability to surface without the requirement to move forward. So if we look at change and those of the women that are considering staying in these defaults, and you might see it as boxes that they are dancing around, and they can move and weave, and if you saw it as a storage shed with different piles of boxes, they can walk around this and look at it from different perspectives and see from different angles. They might even climb on top of boxes or move them. It appears as though life or experience is changing, but they are still stuck in the same room, in the same environment, that they are just shuffling, moving, and rearranging. This is what you might consider a prison of their own thinking, because they're afraid to A, take the boxes out of the storage shed and unpack them, or B, look at what it is that they've been avoiding inside the storage shed so that they can unpack it and remove it into a new environment to see what is necessary to take out of that space into a new environment, or to continue to leave in the storage shed for a later point of time. What this means is that those boxes are not bad, it's just that most people are stuck in the storage shed itself and don't realize there's anything outside of that experience because they're afraid to move. Often what will happen is the fear, the terror, the horror is a false interpretation of what they might see inside the box and not what's actually inside the box. And based on this level of what you might call fear paralysis, they're unable to action or look within. Most of the lack of change is illusionary aspects of human mind that has categorized something in a survival mechanism that has no threat to life. And so what happens is life becomes stagnant, they stay still, and effectively they end up being disassociated from life itself.
Just to focus quickly on comfortability. So, comfortability is just an energy signal of consciousness. So, it's neither good or bad. But at what point does comfortability go from being supportive to destructive?
If we use it as a scale and you have horror and terror and fear, comfortability is up the scale. Comfortability is at the pivot point of where you might consider the shift into change. Change moves into awakening and then what you might consider expansion or evolution. So there's different understandings of that pathway and where one might sit along that. If one is evolving, they have less fear because they've decided to use that energy to no longer contract and stay in the box, but instead expand and open their mind. So based on that scale that has just been explained to you in the different degrees of where you might put other emotions and other experiences along the pathway of separation consciousness or ego consciousness, death consciousness, up into life consciousness, expansion or creation, you will see that change itself can be something that you might consider a pause, a hold, or an inaction movement. Anything that's between two sides of the poles will have less current or direction because it becomes more of a neutrality experience. And change can be sat in neutrality for long periods of time without what you would consider destructive experiential manifestations. For comfort to become destructive to one's experience is when there is an incongruency in the human experience, the soul experience, and the God's guidance. God can and does guide comfort zones to be held, that they might be considered peaceful or embodied or grounded experiences. And you can sit in what you might consider maintenance, which would be a comfort level and something that can be consciously chosen for long periods of time without any destructive experience taking place. Yet what happens is that because the human chooses to choose something that is comfortable based on the areas of layers that are not brought to conscious awareness, such as layers of fear or desires for expansion and evolution, that's when destructive behavior comes, because you have conflicting points of view. You could sit in your comfort zone from all three pillars of perspective, masculine, feminine, and the middle way. Or if you have a feminine that is wanting to hold on to comfort, a masculine that's driving evolution, and the neutral point that might hold information within the shadows of consciousness that doesn't have any specific emotion, but it is unwitnessed, this will cause for a disruption in one's internal being. And if it's not looked at from a conscious perspective, or what you might consider shadow work, self-realization practices, or meditative experiences, one will create an experience that is destructive so that they are able to see the parts of themselves that are not in coherence or unity with each other. And this is where damage occurs in the human or the woman's life experience.
Thank you. That was really clarifying. Question 2. What does it mean when someone keeps having the same conversation about the same wound for years? What's actually happening there?
The misconception or the ego projection that's placed on an individual or a woman such as this that might be talking about the consistent wounding or the consistent pain that they've experienced is actually generated from something that your society does not acknowledge and doesn't quite understand in the form of evolution and the communication through the bandwidth of ability that each individual has. So to explain this, what we mean is that a woman who might be telling the story of her childhood pain or an abusive partner or the loss of someone close over and over for years or even decades, that this continual story continues to come up because instead of what the outside lens thinks, that they're just not healing, they're not changing, they're wanting to wallow in their pity, they're wanting to experience sympathy or validation. What's actually taking place when a story such as that is repeated over and over and over is they've created their own prison that they can't actually get out of. And what is desperately being expressed is a cry for help or assistance to be able to see the element of self that they're unable to see within them. So when someone tells the story, the brain is constantly trying to find a pattern or a behavior that breaks the synapses pathways that have been built, which you might consider the prism matrix of that individual's experience. And because they've got such a small, limited ability to see beyond the story that becomes this little tiny cage over their being, they can't see a way in or out of what has kept them in this narrative. And so when someone is consistently sharing, there is an element of recognition that they do not have the consciousness, the awareness, or the ability to understand the key point that might unlock that element of self to see beyond that part of their story and to effectively heal or bring back the fragmented part of self. So what you might see this is the fragmentation or the pain or the wound or the lost part of the individual's consciousness echoing and repeating over and over and over like a broken record so that the individual can eventually hear the part of self that is missing, that wants to be witnessed. Although this is challenging for many on the outside world to understand, it is not something that is consciously taking place, yet it is something that becomes a protective mechanism and a reason not to change, because it takes a requirement to actually have a level of awareness or a catalyst moment to recognize that one's in the prison of their own thinking or story to begin with and realize they don't have a solution or they can't problem solve it themselves and require an external to enter or break through feedback to allow for the awareness of what's taking place. This is why catalyst moments are very important to those that are stuck in certain levels of consciousness, because they can't hear God or their soul through the language and the narrative that is being expressed through their mind. Everything they are speaking out is their perception of God speaking through them. And so someone who's speaking consistently about pain or trauma that is unable to effectively heal it is God expressing that I need help because I don't know how to heal this aspect of myself.
Wow. Super profound. I have a question. I'm just going to find it quickly. It came up before when you were talking about the reason they repeat their story is so they can hear themselves. But then you explained, because I was thinking, like, how is that person going to, I guess, wake themselves up out of their trance if they've been repeating it for 5 years? And then I guess you answered it through catalyst events. So is that one of the core reasons that soul or God creates contrasting catalyst events for us, because humans don't necessarily have the current capability or capacity to get themselves out of it themselves?
So based on the current human experience and the many different facets of what has taken place in relation to how human beings function, there is an inability to support awake consciousness or that of a level of understanding different levels of mind and how it would like to evolve through ego development. These kinds of philosophical interpretations are not commonly understood or taught in your education systems or through any of the predominant matrix experiences that raise or bring up humans from the moment of birth into the moment of death. And so therefore, based on the different societal, religious, and governmental agencies, there is an inability to educate on something that is actually quite simple to navigate and assist. If there was structures, schools that taught consciousness, taught levels of bandwidth understanding and how each personality goes through each level and sees the world from a specific spectrum or from a specific place of identification, then what can be gifted is a pathway of what school could be, which is moving them through the layers of self to come into a higher vibrational experience as we start to lift the layers of fog, unconscious, and illusion from that of the human experience. Yet based on what is, we cannot change the present moment. We can only dream and understand and bring forward a future that allows for things like this to occur with the education that is available, and to have speakers of truth that can allow for this, as it is not actually a woo-woo or spiritual thing. It is very scientific, and it runs in the understanding of frequency and vibration and the hermetic laws and universal principles that build your reality together. So your question being that you are curious about how someone could awaken from this fog or this illusion. Based on what is here, it could take them many lifetimes to create an experience like that. It is not God that creates it for them. It is them that get so desperate that they can't hear their own voice, and it becomes too painful in separation from the true essence of their being that they have to wake up, because they can no longer continue to be in what you might consider numbness or disconnection from self. Suffering is experienced in many different formats. Suffering is not just hurt or fear. Suffering comes when we neglect ourselves, forget ourselves, become blinded by reality. Suffering has a spectrum of emotion based on a separation from the true nature of being. And so the catalyst is really separation in itself. When has one become bored of or sick of or in too much discomfort of the separation point that they choose on some level, even a micro thought, that they would like to experience something different because this is something that is no longer resonant to their reality?
I have one more question on this, and it might be a little irrelevant, but it feels true to ask. Humans always talk about divine timing and everything happening in alignment and when they're ready. But is that really true? Are we really on this timeline of divine timing, or are we the ones who actually create divine timing for us?
As some humans would say, you are picking up what we are putting down in the ethereal realms and in between the words, which is beautiful and powerful to understand your cognitive awareness and capacity with consciousness. What you're expressing around divine timing or any other construct of reality is simply the manifestation of the separate mind creating a point of view, a perspective, an identity, a pathway that ultimately leads to the one. There is no story, no word, no language, no religious belief system, process that is not ultimately trying to send each individual being, or what you might say is an individual expression of the one, or a God presence in its own unique form, back to itself. These individual experiences are very different, but they can either go in an ascension form to find themselves, a descension form to find themselves, or they can return to the center where all directions move into the 0 point field of what you might consider remembrance, or return to the God self. Now, we could make this more and more complex, yet there's no point in explaining dimensional realities or directions that would only further confuse the answer. What is important to understand is that every concept you have ever thought of, anything that you ever think you're here for, anything that you ever believe is true and real, is all a narrative of mind. Mind that is in a separate fragmented expression, trying to find itself back into wholeness and interpreting itself through whatever means is necessary to find that place of reconciliation.
Thank you. And to go into the polarity of that, when a woman says she's working on herself, but nothing in her life is changing, What is truly underneath that?
Now, this is where we get a little bit more intellectual into the confusions around polarity, creation, separation, connection. One of the ways that is more obvious as a way to assist this is to understand that there is a reality of creation and there is a reality of non-creation. There is source or God and there is not source or God. And so when we talk about different experience, such as someone that might be expressing, believing, explaining, convincing, or using a verbal narrative to say that they are moving through change, there is two different perspectives, as there are in all situations of light and dark, up and down, in and out, that this individual may be trying to convince others that there is change so that they are able to use others for their own agenda, or that they simply have circled so many different loops around that storage room that they don't remember the initial place they started. They don't have the ability to see the corner that they might have stepped up from or what direction they might have moved around, because there are blind sites. And so change appears to be true. And this is only able to be recognized when we ask ourselves very truthful questions. Questions and self-reflection questions are one of the best ways to understand the trap of the mind. Because the mind is always convincing itself of its own data and its own feedback to prove its narrative and its righteousness, the mind will use the data that it has to confirm its own confirmation bias and continue the pathway so it can problem solve the situation. So what is required is to break that pathway and ask questions that allow for a different answer to be provided rather than running the defaults of what the synapses pathways provide. So for instance, both of these examples, either the woman that doesn't realize that she's just circling the storage shed, or the one that is trying to convince those from the outside world to come into the storage shed because it's so much more exciting in there, and it may be, depending on your point of view and perspective and what's important to you. Both of these individuals, if they would like to change, grow, evolve, become self-aware, and break the synapses pathways that is keeping them trapped or others trapped through their own nets of consciousness, require to ask very truthful and uncomfortable questions so that the brain has an ability to question. What you'll find is that default narratives, or what we call autopilot, or the confusion of one's own self-story, is disrupted, and that the brain will not know how to actually cognitively answer. If you ask a question and someone answers with, "I'd never thought about that," or perhaps, "Wow, I don't know what that just did, but I feel very different," or some sense of response where there is a pause and the brain actually has to search for a different piece of information, it breaks the loop of patterning that then allows for information to be received differently. This is why self-reflection questions or asking questions to others is the most powerful awakener and opportunity to assist consciousness to expand and evolve. If we continue to, as a human species, speak our narrative and explain our justified reasoning for why we educate, do, or express in the way that we do, what happens is the mind can completely reject and deny the information and continue in its story, loop, and construct of thinking. Whereas when you ask a question, because the brain is designed to problem solve, it will want to answer. It is the greatest way to unlock the human species. The more questions that are asked of one's own consciousness, the more that those synapses of control can be deconstructed and dissolved by using the brain in the way it was designed, to assist consciousness to expand by asking questions to problem solve in ways that are not yet understood in its current conscious state.
And for the women that are numbing themselves, how would that numbness disguise itself as peace? And why is that one of the most dangerous places a woman can be?
The experience of numbness is where the mind has become so strong that there is a disconnection from the somatics, from the physical experience, and from the emotional intelligence. As a human species, you are made up of many different systems, or what you might call computer programs. You might consider these different intelligence or brains. When one is experiencing numbness, they are only functioning from one intelligence system. This is the brain. This is the separate mind and the communication through that level of understanding life and experience. The damage is that the other brains or intellectual systems, energy systems, and programs that have been created for the advancements of the human species have gone offline, disconnected, unplugged, or programmed in ways where there is a larger separation point from the ability to connect. So those that are sitting in numbness often recognize that they are numb. There is not a misunderstanding of this, nor is there a denial of this. Most of the individuals that are sitting in numbness recognize that they can't feel, see, taste, or touch things in the way that others express. They watch a movie and they wonder, why don't I experience that? Why don't I feel like that? They might hear a friend or an experience of someone through a news article or a podcast, and they start to question why they're not feeling, sensing, or experiencing emotions such as others that they see in their reality. And so there is awareness. Numbness has awareness. The thing that will assist with numbness is the recognition that it means getting into a physical body experience. Numbness cannot be solved by mind. Numbness can only be solved by body. Body will express the elements of self that reconnect and allow for the different information systems to connect and communicate with each other. The problem and the damage with numbness is you can live in numbness by being too afraid in the internal and subconscious and superconscious elements of self to look at what sits in the physical body. Often someone that sits in intense amounts of numbness is because their body is full of separation points, fragmentation, and trauma. And so it's a coping mechanism that allows them to stay disassociated from the elements of self that have been hurt. And by continuing to maintain the numbness, they don't have to feel what is hurt. And yet what we have come to understand and realize is you cannot numb selectively. You cannot disconnect selectively. So if you disconnect your hurt, you disconnect your joy. If you disconnect from rage, you disconnect from elements of connection. If you disconnect from hate, you disconnect from love. They're all different sides of the polarity spectrum and stream of consciousness information. So when you numb yourself from bad emotions, you numb yourself from good emotions, and you live effectively as someone that is in an empty shell or vessel that cannot experience life, that cannot feel their partner, that sees joy but does not know what joy experience is like, that sees grief but has no interpretation. And this in itself is its own suffering, because most that experience numbness want to desperately feel something. And this is where they will create chaos or havoc around them to cause something that might bring them or jolt them back into their physical body and experience.
I heard you touch on dissociation in that. How would dissociation show up in women that seem to be functioning completely normal? I feel like those in numbness, it's obvious they're in numbness, but what about the women that you can't tell that they're in states of dissociation or numbness?
So women from the outside world, or any human being from the outside that might appear to have it together, that might be very functional in their reality, often they have become dependent on mind. They become so intellectually talented that they create patterns, pathways, processes, and thinking paradigms that allow for them to be able to express, communicate, and hide their very own experience from themselves and from others. This manifestation of human experiencing, or a woman that is disassociated from themselves and from life itself, are able to function through data collection and processing. So a strong mental quadrant or a strong mental channel, where effectively the channel or the body itself is without light or information. Now, this is where you might consider someone to be more of an NPC. And I know this was one of the questions that you had as a perspective or a point of view. Someone who is highly connected to their mental quadrant only has disconnected from their emotional, spiritual, and physical. Currently, most of the human species sits between either mental quadrant domination or mental and emotional quadrant domination, and very few have the ability to be in their spiritual and the integration of their physical. What happens is that when someone is only functioning from the mental quadrant, they are without emotion, they are without spirit, and they are without physical connection to their three-dimensional reality. This means that they live in the realms of consciousness itself, and they are without what you might consider human feelings, sensations, and experiences. They don't have the same drive or needs, because these other quadrants are effectively empty. Now, if one wants to move from mental quadrant functionality, they must recognize that they must immerse themselves into the emotional quadrant. Now, for both men and women of your society and collective earth experience at this present moment, that can be a terrifying experience for different reasons, for different genders. For the female gender, as this is what we're speaking on today, it's the fear of the emotions, the terror, and the abuse that sits in the body. The fear of feeling and the vulnerability of being weak all comes down to a fragmentation of dominance of patriarchal energies. So women are afraid to feel based on their perception of man. Whether they recognize or realize this, they hold themselves high in the mental quadrant because they're trying to overcompensate in strengthening intellect and ability to overthrow something that has been created for many, many, many eons by understanding mind or masculine consciousness before they allow themselves to connect to emotions and that of intuitive guidance. An individual cannot run from intuitive communication or from feeling guidance until they have unlocked and moved into the emotional quadrant. This often comes with a massive emotional somatic release. Depending on how quickly this quadrant is unlocked, it may mean many hours of somatic healing or uncontrollable emotional expressions in tears or mood swings, because the numbness then has to move through the different channels or the circuitry system that allows for the somatic body, which is connected directly to the circuitry system, to run pathways of energy that have not yet been understood or interpreted. It is only when the emotional quadrant has gone through clearing and purification, and there is an acceptance of being emotional, an acceptance of feeling things, an acceptance of vulnerability, and an acceptance of connection beyond mind, that the spiritual quadrant can open and activate, which connects you into higher states of experience in the form of what you might call altered states or the presence of God.
And for those women that are sitting in numbness or dissociation, I would assume they're in some form of living on autopilot, or as you mentioned, an empty vessel or an empty shell. So what would some signs is moving through life in this state of being?
Some of the direct signs of disassociation or the emptiness of the emotional, spiritual, physical quadrant connection points or energy movement would be that of not questioning one's reality, not questioning one's narrative, inability to speak about oneself vulnerably, telling the story, being able to intellectually understand things but not hold them in what you might call embodied wisdom, knowledge, someone who may have spent many hours researching, studying, and understanding mind, psychology, or the way the earth or experience works, There is a coldness from the outside view. There is emptiness. There is a lack of warmth. There is a lack of connection. There is a fragmentation in presence. Some of the verbal and physical ways is they will speak from their higher chakras, their throat, perhaps even up to their third eye or their crown. They'll be speaking in a head voice, which is separated from the other aspects of themselves. They may also be using their eyes in interesting movements that look up to the ether or up into the mind rather than staying present in the forward functioning eye focus or the other areas of direction. Your eye movements are a direct impact and understanding of where it is that you're constantly pulling information from or where you're functioning from. This is why closed eye experience is very helpful for becoming connected to the physical body, which is what most of the human experience requires. By taking the eyes down and closing an internal awareness, there's no other choice but to stay more connected to the physical body and experience that brings up different energies and emotions that have not yet been accessed. This specific form of mental is the individuals that talk about things like weather, talk about things like the news, talk about things like their neighbor and how frustrating they are. They basically repeat a story or a pattern. They don't question and they complain a lot. They may also feel frustrated or victimized. When you sit in a mental quadrant interpretation, you're often functioning from victim consciousness, which lacks empowerment, which is an internal expression of emotion. Empowered people have met their emotional experience. Everything else is manipulation through psychological abuse. So those that are more sociopathic have mastered mind. They've understood their own mental so that they can avoid all other quadrants and they do not have to function from any other reality. This shows up in the way that they have oddness or they might respond in ways that are not socially acceptable. There are many different formats and there are lots of different symptoms to this. Yet if a woman might consider that they might be stuck in their mental paradigms and disconnected from their emotions, the invitation or the suggestion would be to start to look at how you might be able to find a somatic body worker, emotional therapist, or some form of redirecting the focus of consciousness from mind. Whereas this is where psychology and counseling becomes insignificant or no longer helpful because there is only a continuation of the story that doesn't allow for the shift into the emotional quadrant. That this woman has a choice just by this transmission communication to decide whether or not they want to be continued to be ran by the mental stories, thought forms and paradigms, or face the emotional elements of themselves that can be fearful and yet ultimately gift a life experience that has not been able to be felt. The hardest thing about being an NPC is that you don't know the feeling of love. You don't know the feeling of connection. And these are certain things that all individuals at their core desire to feel because we are all representations of the one God source, yet we can be experiencing through not God experience.
I have one more question touching on this. Is there a difference between NPCs and someone who just hasn't awakened their crown chakra yet?
The short answer is no.
Really? Wow. I didn't expect that. I felt like they were different. That's really crazy.
So the only way that you could say differentiate it is that an NPC is a human vessel that has all chakra systems closed and are unable to receive information through their meridian lines and conscious interpretations of different realities. So they are out of body and in the consciousness interpretation of mind programming, default mechanisms, programs, computer systems, conditioning. And it's not necessarily that an NPC is out of body, it means that they don't have a soul to be in body. And it is only through the choosing of evolution and through the choosing of emotional connection that one begins to build a soul connection. So what you'll find is that an NPC doesn't hold emotional connection to that quadrant. And then when they start to transition, they'll be functioning from both elements, which allows them to start to build a blueprint, a soul, and create from a new dimensional reality of understanding. And that's when they start to be filled with the light of the soul. And this is when people start to see light return into eyes, luminosity through skin, and changes in the physical experience. When you look at a human body or a human vessel, it is very clear when a woman has connection to life. If her hair is dry and brittle, her skin is without moisture and a luminosity. If she has a lack of hydration, if her skin is dull, if she holds an absent appearance, then you'll find that she may be sitting without soul connection. And this is why when big transformation and catalysts occur, more light enters the vessel. This is an obvious expression and one that people end up saying they can see in the aura or the field around them as such a strong expression of light. It is not that it's actually around them or that it is within them, it's that they've accessed this level of consciousness that they now allow to flow through them.
Fascinating. I feel like I could ask questions on this topic for hours, and I'm going to hold it so we can continue focusing on.
I reckon
Sorry,
I
go.
have maybe 3 more questions in my brain.
You've been going really well, really, really well.
It's nice to be able to do it again. I missed it.
I imagine it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, yeah. I will correct myself. Actually, that's a great thing to leave in. Channeling does not take a lot of energy if we're in our true natural state. If we are holding fragmentation, separation, or other people's consciousness, which we know I've been doing for the last 19, 20 months, is it takes a lot of energy because it has to, if you imagine it like if you're just yourself, you're all energy, there's no gaps, there's no holes. When there's other people's consciousness or traumas or distortions, the channel has to go around and move and find the threads of information, which is challenging and exhausting and requires a lot of the mind to navigate the thread around. Whereas when you're a clear conduit, it just moves through easeful and graceful. And the awareness is that I still have some stuff that I'm moving through at the moment that limits my full 100% capacity.
Well, I'm impressed. So, how much of what women are calling their identity is actually inherited patterning they never consciously chose?
This is one of those answers that is quite paradoxical and has a discomfort in the expression of recognizing that almost all of the conditioning and the experience that each and every human being is in currently based on the Earth's point of decline is all inherited, whether it be ancestral, whether it is through conditioned subliminal, whether it's through entering this reality to begin with, that there is a level of identity that has been created for each and every individual. However, the element of free will and sovereign expression is that we create our conditions so that we can unravel the not self expression of the identity. So anyone who still says that they're functioning from identity, and this is one that I have seen personally, and people that are marketing and branding, they're marketing from identity, yet they're not marketing from the true authentic self or the essence of the self soul. And they talk about creating an identity for a brand. This is yet just another conditioned aspect of an element of hiding from the true nature of one's being and continuing to change what you might consider suits or clothes as you move through your experience. So the identity that most women are functioning from is the entire human fragmentation of mind. This is trillions upon trillions of different identities based on different perspectives and fragmentation through many formats that we don't have time or space to go into. And this understanding is that each woman that is holding a separate mind, which is the easiest way to make sense of it, is just in twos rather than in the multi-fractured expressions. If you figure out how much of each woman is functioning from true self or authentic self, and how much is it that they're still functioning from separate mind or separation consciousness, and you'll find that in this separation consciousness, it is not something that was chosen, yet a byproduct of environment or experience as a way to come into the true self. So the separate mind is created by the experience. The true mind is created by the true self of source, and yet they coexist together, the not self and the true self. And so you can say that both inherently exist and both are constantly working together to navigate based on what each individual human would like to experience to evolve. Because if there is an individual that has been in the true self or the authentic self as a primary functioning state, they may desire to understand reality from the not self and descend into the darkness of the void, and ultimately return back to the 0 point field when they have completed that journey.
I noticed myself halfway through some of the channels, I'm like, I can't compute any more information. And I notice I'm just sitting here like listening, but nothing's processing.
Because you're like, I've received my level of bandwidth capacity.
Question 8. What is happening energetically when women try to keep awakening someone who hasn't asked to wake up?
When a woman is attempting to heal, awaken, support, change, or direct consciousness or energy in the outside world, it is a direct mirror experience of the element of self that they have completely denied, disassociated from, and disconnected from. When they focus on the wounded child, or when they focus on the narcissistic man, or when they focus on the individual in poverty, it is really just showing the same energetic expression, the same archetypal identity, and the direct mirror to an element of self that is feeling as though it is a wounded child, a narcissistic or controlling dominant personality, or that of starvation and poverty consciousness within one's own life force connection. And so what is occurring is the constant out of focus means that the inner is not being able to be reconciled or recreated in a way that would be more connective. And instead of focusing and recognizing and realizing that any outer need to help change, awaken, fix, or move reality in any way, shape, or form is just the internal element of self still desiring to be witnessed. It is easier for them to focus on the outside world's wrongness, sadness, badness, than it is to see that element within themselves. You see this quite often with different humanitarian figures or pioneers of consciousness. They talk about world views and global views being wrong and focus so much around educating people to help the children, help the wars, or change reality. Now, not that this is not a necessary part of human development as a whole. It is, however, a bypass of the internal expression of self that is looking to be witnessed, seen, and reconciled into wholeness.
Lucky last question. What do you say to the women who are waiting for a sign, a catalyst, a rock bottom, when from where you sit, the sign has already been there for years?
What we would ask is, what is a sign to you? What really is a sign to make change, to move direction, to awaken, to ask a question, or to redirect yourself into a new format of experience, consciousness, or understanding of thyself? Because if we look at signs and what we would consider a signal or a representation, It is often defined by one's own narrative of what a sign even is. And therefore we must decide what is a sign to us, what would be the definitive answer, what would be the understanding and the physical manifestation of reality that would tell me that this is the pathway for me, or that would tell me that it isn't. The challenge is that so many women and human beings are trying to ask for signs, but they're not listening to the fact that the signs are everywhere, that they have been speaking in many multifaceted ways, and that they are ignoring and denying the signs because they don't know what sign they want to see. They haven't decided what a sign is for them, and because they don't even know what a sign is for them, they cannot receive the sign that is right in front of them. And so this is where self-inquiry and understanding language or identification is important for self-evolution, transformation, and change. When you are asking for someone to respect you, it's easy to ask for someone to have respect, but what is respect to you? Often, most people don't even know what their version of respect is, their version of love, their version of boundaries, their version of understanding reality itself. Therefore, how can you ask for something if you are not clear about what you are already in and what you are already experiencing? Because you will just continue to ignore the very things that you've asked for. When you ask, you will receive, but you may not receive in a way that is what your identification or your ego or your programmed mind has decided is exactly that energy signature or interpretation of reality.
To go into that a little further, would you say those that are looking for signs, one moment, what would you say is the one thing that person could do to allow themselves to receive said signs?
The easiest way would be to let go of your own idea or identification of what a sign is. So when you ask for a sign, be open to receiving all signs so that you're able to recognize it when it arrives.
And would that come with a level of self-trust and surrender?
The sign identification itself does not come from that, and yet the action to follow the sign itself would require trust and surrender.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. So we just came to our last question of the day. I know that I am at my capacity. And I may be getting there. So I want to say thank you for all that came today and are witnessing this. And I don't have a doubt many women are receiving a lot from the insights and the information here. I know I did, and had a lot of reflections of my own journey. And I was one of these women that have experienced nearly every single thing that we have talked about today. And I'm really grateful that I was able to lead myself to the point I'm at now and to be a witness of myself. But that all had to start with my own actioning and trust and surrender.
Yes. And I am at capacity, but what I would love to do is to invite those that do feel like there was things that shifted in your neurology, your biology, and the beauty of listening to direct channeling is you don't have to actually understand it, and you don't even have to cognitively receive it. So one of the things that they spoke about in the channel is that your mind can lock itself up in its mind. And if you listen to things that feed your mind, such as direct channeling, which is very intellectual and it's actually tricking your brain, it can teach you to come into your body, to change the synapses pathways, to problem solve and experience in a different way. This is why in conscious evolution, they say, listen to people that are of a higher education, a higher consciousness than you. It doesn't matter if you don't understand it because your body will adjust to the frequency, the vibration. So the more that you actually read and receive information that is well beyond your bandwidth, eventually one day you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. So if that's something that is true for you and you would like to receive more direct channels, we do have in our Linktree a direct channeling session that goes for 60 minutes. So kind of like a version of this for your own personal story. You get to ask questions like the first thing that comes up is, why is my partner? And I was like, why are you asking about other people? That's the kind of thing that would come through, is like, what direction? What's my purpose? How do I move beyond this? How do I heal this? And so clarity and energetic transformation occurs in those sessions. And we also have the purity of Isis. So anyone who feels they might have a version of this access point, this gift, in truth, we are all channels. How I can explain a channel is that some bodies or some souls, some spirits are coded or hold a frequency that allows for mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical to work together in more of the 0 point field. So it has required a level of evolution, perhaps before this lifetime, that is being reawoken to and remembered, but there is a level of advancement beyond ego and separation consciousness. And that's what the purity of Isis is for. It's for women, not necessarily transmissions or channels like this, but for accessing your own unique medicine and magic, and to experience all levels of moving beyond the stuckness, the stagnation, and deciding to make change in your life experience. So we will have all of those links in the description box. And if it feels true, you can receive our masterclass, our Q&A, which is not so consciousness capacity exuberating, if that's a word, that fits in there. It's more of us having a nice educational conversation around mystery school teachings, as well as there's 3 free initiations. So if you follow the website, you'll be able to get access to those and book a discovery call. So until next time, thanks then for all of your brain and body and holding this amazing space.
Thank you. I'm very grateful.
And we will see you on our next creation. All right.